Ang programa ng Special Opinion Balita at iba pa ay tumatalakay sa mga isu pang kasalukuyan at napapanahon. Mapapolitika, mapapinyon, mapakomentaryo at balita, ang programa ito ay patas sa lahat. Walang kinikilingan, walang kinakampihan, at walang pinapanigan ang programa ito. Ang programa ito ay public service sa kahanginan at trabaho lamang.
Female voice, male voice, mommy voice, monster voice.
Okay, ang time check natin sa umagang ito, magtataka kayo bakit ako magprograma, no? 1 minutos po pasado las 9, 13 po ng October 2024. Okay, araw po ng linggo, no? Happy Family Day. Okay, huwag kayo mabigla mga suki, no? Bakit ako magbalita araw ng linggo? Time po ng pahinga. Ito po ang kadahilan ng mga suki, mga kababayan. Okay, magandang umaga. Okay, Sunday morning. Okay, good morning. Sa Sunday na ito, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuhu sa lahat po na mga nakikinig sa atin, no? Okay, si Jamjum galing po sa Amman, Jordan. Okay, biglang nag-pop up po, no? Ang ating system na meron daw, okay, hostile aircraft, importation for siren. Okay, narinig po sa loob po ng Israel, mga suki, mga kababayan. Kaya na, bigla na akong mag-program, mga suki, no? Ayan. Ito na kasi ang linya ng trabaho natin, mag-monitor. Okay, kung saan-saan sa daigdig mga kaguluhan, ito po ang trabaho natin, no? So, biglang nag-pop up. Pakinggan natin ng kung anong sinabi ni Jamjun. Diyan po sa Amman, Jordan, kasi malapit lang ang Israel po sa kanila. Border lang ang pagitan, mga suki, no? Dinig na dinig kung anong nangyari po sa bansang Israel. Na-monitor po ng Amman, Jordan, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Okay, sa Consolidated News, Special Report. Okay, dito po sa programa, halo-halo Special Opinion, Balita at iba pa ngayong araw. Okay, sa Servicio Publiko Tinig ng Mamamayan at saka ugnayan sa mamamayan. Ayan. And then, pag-concern po sa mamamayan. Okay, sa lahat na kaya po ng programa natin, no? So, pakinggan natin si Jamjun ng Al Jazeera. Diyan po nakabase po sa Aman Jordan, no, sa kanyang report. At saka hindi ko kung sino po itong naka-host, babae po mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Ayan. Sige. Baka umpisa naman na kaguluhan po mga suki, no? Pakinggan natin. Parehas-parehas tayo makikinig kasi malayo tayo. Pumagitan lang ng mga kasama natin. Okay, yung mga magtiwala sa programa natin, ito lang pag-asa natin, no? Boses lang. Okay, hindi ko pa kaya mag-digital mga suki, no? Ayan, sige.
Turn to our correspondent in Amman, Jordan's capital, Mohammed Jamjoon. He is there.
Si Muhammad Jamjoon yan.
Reporting inside Israel. Mohammed, what are you hearing from the Israelis about the situation in Tel Aviv?
Okay. Sandali lang, no? Adjustin natin ang sound para marinig po ng husto, no? Lakas na ito.
Well, Laura, there's still conflicting reports coming out. The situation's very fluid. There are reports right now that there was a hostile aircraft infiltration into the greater Tel Aviv.
Ibig sabihin greater metro, pag dito sa atin, Metro Zamboanga, no? Okay, Metro Zamboanga, Metro Davao, Metro Manila, Metro Cebu. So, doon mismo po ang report ito ni Muhammad Jamjoon po, dyan galing po sa Amman, Jordan. Okay, para malaman natin, marami tayong pamilya po sa Middle East. Okay, iyon po ang concern po ng programa natin, no? Marami tayong kamag-anak sa Middle East. Okay, ako, ikaw, kung sino po Pilipino, dyan po sa Middle East. Kahit siya dyan sa, okay, sa kaguluhan, sa Amman, Jordan, o kaya sa loob ng Israel, sa Lebanon, meron po ay kamag-anak tayo, no? Ayan. Sige.
Area that includes a suburb of Tel Aviv called Herzliya. There are also reports that perhaps a drone or perhaps wreckage from a drone that may have been intercepted has hit a building in the Tel Aviv area as well. As I said, it is a fluid situation. We know that there were air raid sirens all over the city in the last 10 to 15 minutes, that there is a lot of worry in Tel Aviv right now as to what exactly happened, and it seems as though the Israeli air defense systems were activated. There are these videos reporting to show perhaps one of these hostile aircrafts that infiltrated the airspace over Tel Aviv, perhaps being shot down. So that's why it's unclear right now as to what exactly hit this building in Tel Aviv that we also seem to be seeing video of at the moment. Obviously, we are waiting to hear more from the Israelis, from the Israeli army, from Israeli police in Tel Aviv, trying to find out if perhaps there were any injuries or any casualties, what the extent of any damage may be, and if Tel Aviv is at this particular time still under high alert. Again, we should be hearing more from the Israeli army, from the Israeli police, from medical authorities as well in the coming half an hour to hour once more details emerge, once more specifics are released. Laura.
Okay, Jamjoon, Mohammed, we'll certainly come back to you for that. But in the meantime, can you just give us an idea of what would usually happen in Tel Aviv if a hostile drone was detected in the sky? Because we normally hear sirens, we normally see people taking shelter. That didn't seem to happen this time.
Well, it's unclear right now as to when exactly sirens were activated and when perhaps this drone may have made impact, because there were reports that sirens had been blaring throughout the city. So the timeline right now is still a little bit fuzzy. That's why we are waiting on these details. But judging by past instances, when there are any type of hostile air attack or infiltration by any type of drones towards Tel Aviv, you would hear air raid sirens. You would have the authorities telling people to seek shelter. Of course, you would have the much vaunted Israeli air defense system, the Iron Dome, activated. So typically you would see drones either being shot down or attempts at those drones being shot down. Of course, what's going on in the city is much different tonight because this is Yom Kippur. This is a holiday, a religious holiday, of course, in Israel. So not as many people would have been out. So it's unclear right now what exactly the authorities are going to be telling the residents in Tel Aviv to be doing, and if the city is still under potentially high alert, what exactly the level of alarm is right now in Tel Aviv. But again, we should be hearing more from the Israeli authorities relatively soon.
Okay, Mohammed Jamjoon, we will certainly come back to you then when we hear a little bit more about the situation. For the moment, many thanks indeed. Let's break.
You've probably never seen these
Okay.
lifelong presbyopic glasses that can be worn no matter what your prescription is. They can intelligently zoom, making both.
Okay. Yan po ang balita po ng ni Muhammad Jamjoon. Okay pa na from Amman, Jordan. At saka hindi ko kilala po itong anchor po sa studio po ng Al Jazeera, mga suki, no? Babae siya. Okay. Hindi, iba mga suki, no? Iba naka-assign ngayon. And then, ang sunod na balita natin tungkol po sa headquarter po ng UN. Okay, nadali po ng mga IDF. According to the report, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? IDF po, Internal Defense Forces po ng Israel, mga suki, no? Maraming mga nadamay, pati ata mga Indonesian, ibang national, itong workers po ng United Nation volunteer, mga suki, no? Okay, ayan. Okay? Pakinggan natin po, mga kababayan, itong susunod na report natin, no? Sandali lang. Okay. Okay, sandali lang ha.
Ang programa ng Special Opinion Balita at iba pa ay tumatalakay sa mga isyu pang kasalukuyan at napapanahon. Mapapolitika, mapaopinyon, mapakomentaryo at balita, ang programa ito ay patas sa lahat. Walang kinikilingan, walang kinakampihan, at walang pinapanigan ang programa ito. Ang programa ito ay public service sa kahanginan at trabaho lamang.
Punta natin itong Lebanon, mga suki, no? Okay. Kaya ngayon ang mundo po nasa fingertip na lang natin, no? Okay, nasa fingertip na lang natin ang mundo ngayon. Ayan. Ganoon po ka-power po ng communication, mga suki, no? Okay, global criticism of internal defense forces firing toward UN peacekeepers. US expand Iran sanction. Okay, Trump rhetoric, mga kababayan, no? So, pakinggan natin itong mga nangyayari po ay bakit na tayo magkaganti, mga kababayan, no? Hindi na pinaniwalaan po ang the United Nations General Assembly and the United Nations Security Council. Okay, nobody would listen to them anymore, no? Okay, nobody would listen po to the organization of the United Nations. Okay, the United Nations world body and the United Nations Security Council, no? Okay. United Nations General Assembly. Ayan po, mga suki, no? Katatapos lang magbalitaktakan po mga leader ng mundo po dyan sa United Nations General Assembly, no? So, let's hear from this video, no? Okay. Go ahead. Ayan.
Good evening. There's mounting global criticism of Israeli forces in southern Lebanon
firing towards UN peacekeepers during Israel's conflict with Hezbollah. It follows a second incident in 48 hours of international peacekeepers being injured at their base. The IDF says troops fired at an immediate threat emanating from near.
Okay, ang trabaho ko rito hanggang katapusan ng hininga ko. Tungkol pa rin sa kapayapaan, mga suki, no? Okay. Kahit anuman mangyari ang commitment ko, okay, hanggang katapusan ng hininga ko ay public service pa rin ako sa ngalan po ng kapayapaan, mga suki, sa buong mundo, no? Okay, sa ngalan ng kapayapaan sa buong mundo, yun po ang commitment ko. Okay, hanggang mawalan ako ng hininga, tuloy-tuloy lang po ang trabaho ko dito sa microphone, mga suki, no? Okay. Yung wala pong kinakampihan, walang ay patas lahat po sa mga balita natin, no? Ayan. Sige.
Peacekeeping position on Friday. US President Joe Biden has said he is, quote, absolutely, positively urging Israel to stop firing at UN peacekeepers.
In Beirut's Burj Abu Haida neighborhood, smoke still rises at the site of two apartment blocks flattened by Israeli airstrikes on Thursday. 22 people killed. Local officials say all were civilians. The Israeli military is yet to comment. Further south, Israel also accused.
Okay, formally nakapasok ko nung panahon po ni UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, no? Formally, pero doon, okay, nagkuan-kuan lang ako, mga suki, no? Okay, doon ako naka-engage sa former UN Secretary Kofi Annan, no? Okay, magaling na UN Secretary General. Hanggang ngayon, hindi ako bumitaw po, mga suki, patungkol dito po sa ngalan po ng kapayapaan, no? Okay. Sige po. Okay.
Hitting the wrong targets. This is Nakura, the main base of the UN peacekeeping force in Lebanon, housing more than 10,000 personnel. And here, the surrounds on Thursday, where UNIFIL says two Indonesian peacekeepers were hurt after falling from a watchtower struck by Israeli tank fire. Just a day later, two Sri Lankan peacekeepers also hurt.
Two peacekeepers were injured after two explosions occurred close to an observation tower. These peacekeepers are serving in South Lebanon at the request of the Security Council under Resolution 1701. This is a serious development.
Expressing deep concern at the latest incident, the IDF says troops had responded to an immediate threat from Hezbollah around 50 meters from the base. IDF troops operated in the area of Nakura next to a UNIFIL base. Accordingly, the IDF instructed the UN forces in the area to remain in protected spaces, after which the forces opened fire in the area. But there's been broad global condemnation over the incidents. Russia expressing outrage from China.
Any deliberate attack on peacekeepers is a serious violation of international humanitarian law.
The language from France, a key contributor to UNIFIL, even stronger. It's in no doubt the action was deliberate, summoning the Israeli ambassador in protest, and with Italy and Spain issuing a joint statement of condemnation.
Il est donc tout à fait inacceptable de voir les troupes de la FINUL visées délibérément par les forces armées israéliennes.
We want neither the IDF nor Hezbollah to be present in our areas, and we want neither of them to be firing at our area.
Serangan merupakan upaya teror Israel kepada pasukan penjaga perdamaian dan masyarakat internasional.
Overnight, from Israel's closest ally,
Absolutely positive.
tonight, fresh smoke plumes are rising from Beirut's southern suburbs as hostilities between Israel and Lebanon continue nearly 2 weeks after Israel began its ground operation. Hezbollah and the IDF both trading firepower. The IDF says of 2 drones fired from Lebanon, one was downed by a fighter jet, but a civilian building was hit in the central city of Herzliya. Meanwhile,
Israeli hostages kidnapped last October 7th were heavy on the minds of those gathering in Tel Aviv's Hostages Square, as Jews marked their holiest day, Yom Kippur, under the shadow of war for the first time in decades. Raina Sarapayat, SBS World News.
Meanwhile, in Gaza, charity group Médecins Sans Frontières says thousands of people are trapped in a camp in the city of Jabalia as Israeli forces attack the area. The Israeli military says the operation is aimed at stopping Hamas, which is designated a terrorist organization by countries including Australia, from regrouping. Medics say at least 20 Palestinians were killed by strikes in Jabalia late on Friday. The United States has expanded sanctions against Iran in response to Tehran's missile attack on Israel. The move adds petroleum and petrochemicals to an executive order that targets key sectors of Iran's economy with the aim of denying the government funds to support its nuclear and missile programs. And another evacuation flight out of Lebanon is due to arrive in Australia tonight. Operated by Qantas, the flight departed from Cyprus with up to 220 passengers on board. Further flights are scheduled from Beirut tomorrow as the government continues to urge citizens...
Klaro bang sound? Paki-feedback lang.
Donald Trump has ramped up his immigration rhetoric and repeated his pledge to deport members of violent gangs if he is re-elected president. Mr. Trump and his Democratic rival Kamala Harris have been homing in on battleground states, with the latest national polls suggesting the race remains tight.
Curtain up on Donald Trump's latest campaign stop. Rallying supporters in Nevada, the former US president wasted no time in attacking his opponent, blaming the Democratic candidate for the rising cost of living.
Yet Kamala Harris has no plan to fix it. That place is falling apart. Then she's got ideas. I know what I'm going to do. Why didn't she do it 3.5 years ago, right?
Earlier, Mr. Trump was in Colorado, repeating claims he'd made before about alleged Venezuelan criminal gangs living in certain neighborhoods of Aurora. The city thrust into the headlines in August when a video circulated showing armed men in an apartment building housing Venezuelan migrants. Mr. Trump revealing his plan.
I'm announcing today that upon taking office, we will have an Operation Aurora at the federal level. To expedite the removals of these savage gangs.
Aurora's Republican mayor calling Mr. Trump's remarks about gang activity as grossly exaggerated. Immigration is seen as a key issue for voters in the battleground state of Arizona, where Kamala Harris spoke to Republicans supporting her campaign, announcing she wants to create a bipartisan council of advisors if she wins the election.
Do we stand together as Americans, being our first identity, and come together around these issues? I love good ideas. Wherever they come from, I love good ideas.
The vice president juggling campaigning with her current role, joining Joe Biden virtually for a briefing on the federal government's hurricane response. Ms. Harris's running mate also busy, meeting voters at a rally in swing state Michigan, firing back at Mr. Trump, who appeared to insult the state's largest city while campaigning there.
But if the guy would have ever spent any time in the Midwest, like all of us know, we'd know Detroit's experiencing American comeback and renaissance.
After former President Barack Obama hit the Democratic campaign trail, former President Bill Clinton is also set to join the push for votes in battleground states, with rural voters in the Democrat team's sights. Rochelle Harrison-Pless, SBS World News.
China has denounced the military presence of the US and its allies as a grave threat to peace in the South China Sea. Beijing statements come as the ASEAN summit wraps up, multiple members of which have claims to parts of the waterway. The US claims no part of the South China Sea, but has deployed Navy ships and fighter jets to patrol the waters in support of allies including Australia, Japan, New Zealand and the Philippines.
The increasing military deployment and
Okay, courtesy ng SBS, no? Okay, SBS. Ayan. Good morning, SBS, no? Okay.
These in the South China Sea by the US and a few other non-regional countries, stoking confrontation and creating tensions are the greatest source of instability for peace in the South China Sea.
Mao added that Washington's support of Taiwan's push for independence was incompatible with peace in the Taiwan Strait. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has ended a whirlwind tour of Europe. He was due to attend a summit convened by Joe Biden at the Germany today, the US president instead cancelling his travel because of Hurricane Milton earlier this week, leaving Mr. Zelensky to make his support bids alone before the cold Ukrainian winter sets in.
Arriving at the German Chancellery, the media pack ready and waiting for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. This his final stop on a 48-hour blitz, visiting London, Paris, and Rome, meeting his allies to press the need for continued military support and convincing them of his so-called victory plan.
Сьогодні я представлю план, як, на нашу думку, переможти Росію до миру, тобто як завершити цю війну. Хотілося б не пізніше, ніж у наступному 25-му році, і гарантувати неповторення агресії.
Germany pledging a new package which includes the delivery of additional air defense systems, anti-aircraft tanks, combat drones and ammunition.
Bis zum Jahresende werden wir außerdem mit Unterstützung unserer Partner Belgien und Dänemark und Norwegen ein weiteres militärisches Unterstützungspaket im Wert von rund 1,4 Milliarden an die Ukraine liefern.
The German Chancellor saying it sends a message.
Ein Spiel auf Zeit wird nicht funktionieren. Wir werden in unserer Unterstützung für die Ukraine nicht nachlassen.
The exact detail of Ukraine's victory plan remains unknown, a Ukrainian ministerial advisor indicating it's to avoid speculation. Analysts say it's likely to be multi-dimensional and include the provision of security guarantees.
In the form ideally of NATO membership or something very similar to that. But more specifically, the idea is to develop a very targeted plan which has sort of realistic steps that could move the situation forward on the battlefield.
The coming months will be pivotal. A looming US election and a winter NATO says could be Ukraine's toughest since Russia's full-scale invasion. Tanya Dandrinos, SBS World News.
Armed attackers have killed more than 20 people at a coal mine in southwestern Pakistan. Authorities say around 40 armed men broke into the miners' quarters, rounded up the men and opened fire. It comes days before Pakistan hosts a major international political summit. Most of the victims were from Pashtun-speaking regions and 4 of the dead were Afghan nationals. No group has immediately taken responsibility for the assault. 2 Australians have been arrested in Bali for running a business with alleged links to prostitution. Michael Jerome Legrand and Lindley Legrand were taken into custody after a spa they operated was raided. The Victorian couple are facing up to 12 years behind bars. A Russian court has extended the pre-trial detention of US citizen Joseph Tater until mid-next month. He faces up to 5 years in prison over charges of assaulting a police officer. Tater was detained in August for petty hooliganism, and he was alleged to have abused staff at a Moscow hotel. A fresh criminal case was triggered after reports he later assaulted a police officer. He denies both claims. This year's winner of the Nobel Peace Prize is urging countries which have nuclear weapons not to use them. Japanese organization Nihon Hidankyo is a grassroots movement of atomic bomb survivors who have dedicated their lives to a nuclear-free world. The Nobel Committee is sending its own signal with this selection.
A moment of pure astonishment after Hidankyo became the first Japanese recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize in 50 years.
私たちのスローガンが微力だけど無力じゃないということを心に留めて頑張っているのですが、そのことを本当に実感した瞬間だったなと思います。
The Hibakusha helps us describe the indescribable. To think
the unthinkable.
79 years ago, 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Japan, obliterating the cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, ending the war, but killing at least 150,000 people. In the aftermath, those who survived, known in Japanese as hibakusha, formed Nihon Hidankyo and have since worked tirelessly to ensure they would be the only time the weapons would be used.
They know how it feels like, how it looks like, how it smells when your city is burning from nuclear weapons use.
On the streets of Tokyo, residents were overjoyed by the news. The sentiment also shared at the UN, where the news was well received.
Nuclear weapons remain a clear and present danger to humanity, once again appearing in the daily rhetoric of international relations.
As the war in Ukraine rages on, Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened to use nuclear weapons in the region. North Korea's Kim Jong-un also alluding he might use them against his southern neighbor. There are hopes Hidankyo's message could hinder these possibilities.
That message trickling down to individuals and groups outside of government can end up playing a really important role in world peace efforts.
A group of survivors once avoided over fears their radiation-induced diseases were contagious, now recognized for spreading their anti-nuclear message. Mahmoud Zanguri, SBS World News.
Okay, tapos na? Okay, para kayo tapos na po mga suki, no? Okay, salamat. Meron pa ba? Okay. Sandali lang natin. Mag-break muna tayo, no?
Ang programang Station Opinion Balita at iba pa ay tumatalakay sa mga isyu pang kasalukuyan at napapanahon. Mapapolitika, mapaopinyon, mapakomentaryo at balita, ang programa ito ay patas sa lahat. Walang kinikilingan, walang kinakampihan, at walang pinapanigan ang programa ito. Ang programa ito ay public service sa kahanginan at trabaho lamang.
Okay, pakpan po natin ang SBS, no? Ayan. Okay, kabilang panig naman na tayo, no? Okay, why has Israel attacked UN peacekeeper in Lebanon? Pakinggan natin naman sa galing po sa Al Jazeera, no? Okay. Pakinggan natin.
Condemnation from across the world after Israel twice attacked United Nations peacekeepers in Lebanon. The multi-nation UNIFIL force has been in southern Lebanon since 1978. So why is Israel targeting the mission, and can it remain in place? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Fuli Batibo. Israel's attacks on the UN peacekeeping mission headquarters in southern Lebanon have been condemned across the world. The spectrum of anger reflects the multinational nature of the UNIFIL mission, more than 10,000 troops from 50 countries. Senior military officers say Israel's attacks were deliberate, just days after its ground forces crossed the border into southern Lebanon and after huge bomb attacks in Beirut targeting senior Hezbollah figures but killing many civilians. While at the same time, Israel's genocide in Gaza continues and the world waits for an Israeli attack on Iran in response to missile strikes from there earlier this month. So why is Israel now attacking UNIFIL? What can the UN do about it? And is the mission's future now at risk? We'll put that to our guests shortly, but first this report from Barbara Ango.
An attack by a UN member state on UN peacekeepers. troops were injured after Israeli forces fired at the headquarters of the peacekeeping mission in southern Lebanon twice in 2 days. Nations contributing to UNIFIL condemned Israel's attacks, calling them deliberate and a war crime.
It is unacceptable. It violates what was established by Resolution 1701 of the United Nations. The Italian government, as you know, has strongly protested with the Israeli authorities.
It is therefore totally unacceptable to see UNIFIL troops deliberately targeted by the Israeli armed forces. We condemn it, we will not tolerate it, and will not tolerate it happening again.
Israeli attacks destroyed surveillance equipment, hampering UNIFIL's ability to monitor fighting near the Lebanese-Israeli border.
The shots hit some vehicles and the fuel tanks located inside the base rendered the surveillance system's optical cameras inoperative. The installation was then flown over for a long time by an Israeli army drone.
Israel says it's targeting the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah's commanders and infrastructure. There's fearing that the strikes of the UN peacekeeping mission are in preparation for a long-term occupation of Lebanon will get little comfort from messages from Washington, Israel's primary backer and arms supplier.
What I can tell you is we're watching this very closely. We support their ability to target militants, to degrade Hezbollah's infrastructure, to degrade Hezbollah's capability. But we are very cognizant of the many times in the past where Israel has gone in on what looked like limited operations and has stayed for months or for years.
The scale of Israel's last invasion of Lebanon in 2006 is overshadowed by the intensity of the violence this time.
And if you think that the conflict in 2006, 1,200 people were killed, and only in a few days more than the conflict in 2006. So this is incredibly serious. We are not only urging the parties, but it's also important for the international community to see it as a priority and that there is no military solution. The only solution is political and diplomatic.
For now, UNIFIL peacekeepers are refusing to abandon their posts. Lebanon's army is trying to assert some control while the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah escalates, with little prospect of a ceasefire. Barbara Angopa, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, the UN Interim Force in Lebanon, or UNIFIL, was created in 1978 to oversee the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Lebanon. That's after Palestinian fighters entered Israel by sea from Lebanon, sparking what became known as the South Lebanon conflict. UNIFIL has about 10,000 soldiers from 50 countries along the border with Israel, known as the Blue Line. Its mandate was expanded in 2006 after a 34-day war between Israel and Hezbollah. It now monitors the cessation of hostilities and supports Lebanon's army across the south. The peacekeeping mission is based in Makura, where the Israeli military fired at UNIFIL forces. Well, let's bring in our guest now for today's show. In Beirut, Ali Rizk, a political and security affairs analyst. In Boston, we have Rami Houri, Distinguished Public Policy Fellow at the American University of Beirut. And in Galway, Ireland, Raymond Murphy, Professor with the Irish Centre for Human Rights at the University of Galway and a former UN peacekeeper with UNIFIL in Lebanon. A warm welcome to you all, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us today. Ray Murphy, let me start with you because UNIFIL is a mission you know well, having served in it. Israel says it was targeting what it describes as a threat when it fired at UNIFIL's headquarters at Nakura. From a military perspective, was this an accidental act or a deliberate targeting of UN peacekeepers in southern Lebanon?
I think the only reasonable conclusion that you can draw is that this was a deliberate attack on the UN post. The Nakura headquarters has been there since 1978. It's a very large UN military installation. There is no way that you could interpret the observation post as posing any type of threat to Hezbollah or the Israeli Defense Forces, and therefore the attack on the Nakura observation post was very sinister and marked a very significant escalation in the tensions that had existed between the Israeli forces and UNIFIL, not just now, but since the incursion began. And, you know, I would say to, the viewers, all UN posts are highly visible. They're not normal military posts in a conflict zone that seek to conceal their location and with significant ramparts or defensive positions. They are very vulnerable because they have to be visible. That is their primary role, to be seen to be carrying out the mandate on behalf of the UN Security Council and on the international community. And also, they are peacekeepers, so therefore they are protected persons under international humanitarian law. Their role is not a combat role, it was never intended to be a combat role, and it's something akin to being an armed police officer in a situation of significant tension or violence. But in no circumstances is it lawful or correct to target peacekeepers who are trying to carry out what is essentially an impossible mandate, not just in the current circumstances.
Yeah, and I'll ask you more about this mandate and mission, Ray, in just a few minutes and what it's been able to achieve. But let me bring in Ali into the conversation and get your initial thoughts, Ali. Israel alleges that Hezbollah has been operating on the vicinity of the UNIFIL outposts in Nakura in southern Lebanon, and that the UN peacekeeping mission there didn't do anything to prevent Israeli attacks as stated by Resolution 1701. And that therefore they had to take matters into their own hands. There have been exchanges of fire in the past. How serious an escalation do you think this is? And was this, same question I put to Ray, was this a deliberate attack, you think?
Well, the UNIFIL itself said it was a deliberate attack. I spoke to a UNIFIL official today, and he told me that it was clearly a deliberate attack which was carried out by the Israeli side. And as you alluded to in your question, the Israelis view the UNIFIL in a somewhat hostile way. They think the UNIFIL isn't doing its job when it comes to Hezbollah's weapons or preventing Hezbollah from having an armed presence in the area of operations. Although, as the previous guest said, UNIFIL's job in anything does not include any enforcing mechanism. It is there to support the Lebanese army in carrying out its duty and in ensuring both sides commit to Resolution 1701, and UNIFIL also takes down or reports the violations which are committed by both sides. So, as I said, the Israelis, they do have a hostile stance when it comes to UNIFIL. For quite a long time, they've been demanding a change of UNIFIL's mandate. They want it to be under Chapter 7, which would grant UNIFIL the power or the authority to use force. And I think it stems from here. There is a state of dissatisfaction on the part of Israel regarding UNIFIL, and this is being translated now in the actions they have taken. This is unprecedented, however. 2 days in a row, targeting UNIFIL posts, targeting UNIFIL soldiers. Unfortunately, the injuries have been light injuries, but Israel has taken its hostility towards UNIFIL, I think, to new heights. And I think this is part of a broader Israeli approach, if we would like, of hostility towards the UN organization in general, which we've seen very clearly in the policies and in the rhetoric used by the Netanyahu government.
Right. Rami, your thoughts about this? Even the French have said that this was a deliberate attack on UN peacekeepers, that Israel was sending a message. Just how significant an incident is this in the unfolding war in Lebanon, and what does it suggest about Israel's strategy and the way they're prepared to wage this war in Lebanon?
Israel for years has been critical of the UN and the role the UN plays in the Arab-Israeli conflict, or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, or Lebanese-Israeli. You can see this in Israel's attitude, say, to UNRWA and other UN activities, that it really doesn't want to continue because it thinks that this is a way to keep alive the Palestinian issue and the Palestinian demand for their national rights. In the case of UNIFIL, the Israelis have never seen UNIFIL as a really serious operation that can enforce the peace or maintain the peace. UNIFIL is an observation force more than anything else. It reports violations that it sees. But the Israelis have done this before. They've attacked UN schools, they've attacked medical services, now they've attacked UNIFIL, and they've attacked UNIFIL before. So this is no surprise, and the Prime Minister Netanyahu at the UN General Assembly a while ago called the UN a cesspool. I can't remember the exact quote, a cesspool of vipers, I think, or something like that. Just terrible. They're right out in the open. They don't want international law. And everything they've done in Gaza and Lebanon in the last year has basically shredded international law and UN resolutions and humanitarian protections in the same way that their American and British and German and other weapons have shredded babies and women in their sleep. And they don't care about international law. All they want is their supremacy in the region, and this is their way of showing it.
Right. Ray Murphy, Israel said they gave advance warning, and they say they asked UNIFIL to redeploy temporarily from some of their positions, to move back basically from those positions, but UNIFIL say they refuse to do this because, you know, this is exactly what their mandate is on the ground, to observe what's happening along that blue line. Can you tell us more about the mandate of this mission and how it's evolved since 1978, and then 2006, of course, we saw a change in the mandate. Just how challenging has it been for UNIFIL to fulfill this mandate on the ground in southern Lebanon?
Yeah, the change in the mandate in 2006 was very substantial. The mandate 1701 is completely different from Resolution 425 that was adopted in 1978. And one of the major problems with the current mandate is that it straddles traditional peacekeeping and peace enforcement. It does not refer to Chapter 7, so it's clearly not a Chapter 7 authorized mission. But the expectation, especially from the Israelis and the Americans, was to push UNIFIL to do the job that actually Israel failed to do in 2006, as in essentially oversee the disarmament and the disarmament of Hezbollah in the south and the demilitarization of that area. And it was never a possibility that a UN force of the nature of UNIFIL, that it could undertake a task of that nature and be successful. And within the Security Council, it's interesting that this year there's been unanimous adoption of the resolution reapproving 1701. But last year, in 2023, the Chinese and the Russians abstained because one of the tensions that existed prior to the current incursion was UNIFIL's freedom of movement. UNIFIL is there to support the Lebanese armed forces. Now, the Lebanese armed forces are significantly weak. In fact, the Lebanese government barely exists. And of course, is partially as a consequence of Israeli policies towards Lebanon over many decades. But it's very important for a UN mission to have freedom of movement in its designated area of operations. But Hezbollah consistently sought to restrict that.
Let me ask you very briefly on that, because I think it's important for our viewers to know this. UNIFIL has a limited mandate, but do they have, can they use lethal force to protect themselves, as we've seen in these recent incidents? Could we see UNIFIL use lethal force against the Israeli army if they deemed to be under threat?
Yeah, well, I'd like to distinguish here in answering that the difference between the technical, legal answer in terms of what's on paper and the reality on the ground. According to every UN mandate, UN forces have a right to resort to the use of deadly force to defend themselves and to defend the mandate. But I stress that all UN peacekeeping forces rely on the cooperation of parties. Now, the idea that UNIFIL, which is lightly armed, multinational force with relatively weak command and control systems, etc., but no combat support or no heavy weapons, the idea that it could take on the Israeli Defense Forces would be ludicrous and would be suicidal. There's no prospect whatsoever of UNIFIL being able to make any real military resistance to Israeli encroachments or Israeli use of force against UN positions. As I said, as a last resort, it may use force to defend itself. And there is another technical but very important legal implications for this, because if UNIFIL began to take on Hezbollah or began to take on militarily the Israeli Defense Forces, then UNIFIL troops would lose their protected status because they would become combatants and parties to the conflict, something which none of the contributing states would support and is not the purpose of UNIFIL on the ground.
Very interesting. I think it was important to clarify that. Thank you for that, Ray. Ali, your thoughts about what Ray just said there, and you know, being in Lebanon, what do you think UNIFIL has been able to achieve on the ground in southern Lebanon? And do you think that still today they're able to fulfill their mandate under the current form, or should there be changes to this mission and the mandate?
Well, I think that UNIFIL's role is beneficial. For example, it hosts the tripartite meeting, the meeting which is held occasionally between the Lebanese military, the Israeli military, mediated by UNIFIL. So that is a useful role which is played in that regard, because as you know, there are no official ties between Lebanon and Israel, and so there's no communication. And that hence does facilitate, and I think another very important role for UNIFIL is the recording of the violations of Resolution 1701. As has been mentioned, UNIFIL plays a role, it observes and it takes down the violations of both sides, be it the Israeli side or the Lebanese side. I do have a comment about the enforcement mechanism. I think it's important to know that Hezbollah would never have agreed to the UNIFIL being able to enforce anything. One of the conditions for Hezbollah to approve the UNIFIL mission was that there would not be any enforcement mechanism. So I think that's something important to bear in mind. And another important point I think to mention is that the countries that make up UNIFIL, France, Italy, Spain, Indonesia, all of these countries to some extent have acceptable ties. They don't recognize Hezbollah as being a terrorist organization. So when Hezbollah agreed to all of these arrangements in 2006, I think it had all of these factors in mind. Regarding the violations, I think to hear your previous guests say that Hezbollah was somehow restricting the movement of UNIFIL, I'm not aware of any of these cases. From what I know, it's possible, I'm not sure. But I think most important of all is that you have almost daily Israeli violations of Lebanese sovereignty. So I think that the bigger violator of this resolution 1701, is coming from the Israeli side. And the fact, just one last point, the fact that the Israelis are shooting out deliberately at UNIFIL forces, it means I don't want this UNIFIL presence to be there. Now why is that? Why don't they want the eyes and ears of the international community to be in that area of operations? I think that raises a lot of suspicions as to what Israel is planning to.
Let me ask Rami about that, the political ramifications of this and what the international community might do next. We've heard a firm message coming from European leaders, from France and Spain notably, which is calling for a total arms embargo on Israel. Will a European embargo make a difference, a substantial difference, you think?
If a European or any major embargo of arms sales to Israel were to happen, it would definitely make a difference. But the chances of that happening are pretty close to me going to the moon for a picnic. It's not realistic given the reality of the politics of most of the Europeans, with a few exceptions, like the Irish and the Spanish and others, and the United States. So this is a problem. The UNIFIL for Israel is a symbol of the international community's quest for the implementation of international law and justice for all parties concerned. The UNIFIL also is, in South Lebanon, when you go to South Lebanon, you see relatively cordial relations between UNIFIL and the local communities. UNIFIL goes out of its way to carry out social development projects, help provide villages with wells or things like, symbolic things, but a gesture of human interaction, which the Lebanese like. And the Lebanese and all the Arabs have always looked to the UN as a force of ultimate protection, a source of ultimate protection. So there are cases when, during the Lebanese-Israeli wars or Hezbollah-Israeli wars, the Lebanese would go into a UN facility, and there's one in Kana in South Lebanon some years ago where the Israelis bombed it. The UN facility, the Lebanese were sheltering. So this is a dilemma on a wider scale. The UN is seen positively by Lebanese and Arabs, but mostly negatively by Israelis. So it's a reflection of the stalemate that we have and the Israeli insistence on the massive use of force.
Rami, we talked about the European reaction. What about the Americans, the U.S. reaction? They appear to be criticizing Israel about their actions, but only off the record.
Well, off the record or on the record, I mean, what the Americans say is often reasonable, but what they do is consistently unreasonable in relation to how they deal with the Israelis and how they deal with Palestinians and Lebanese. The Americans are very committed to what Israel is doing. They defend it all the time, and they say, oh, but they should be careful not to kill civilians, which is silly. Nobody takes the Americans seriously when they say these things. So we'll have to see if the elections coming up in the U.S. Have some kind of impact. If enough people don't vote for Kamala Harris because of her position on Gaza, that might be a message to the political elite that you better start paying attention to the sentiments of Americans on how U.S. power is used around the world. The chances of that are slim, but not zero. So really what you need is a more powerful multinational consensus at the UN otherwise.
All right, Ray Murphy, where do you see this heading? I mean, will UNIFIL be eventually forced to leave southern Lebanon if the situation further deteriorates?
I certainly hope not, because, all right, I accept that it cannot fulfill its mandate now. In fact, I don't think it could ever fully implement the mandate that it was given, but it was still playing a significant role in South Lebanon. And the very fact that the Israelis are adopting these tactics, which I believe are intended to drive UNIFIL out in the hope or expectation that it might withdraw, is enough reason for me to support its continued presence. But for many years after the 1982 invasion, Israeli and UN forces were side by side in South Lebanon in what was very difficult and trying circumstances. And UNIFIL did its best to ensure that Israel complied with international human rights law, international humanitarian law, and continued to report from the ground on what was happening during that particular occupation. So I think the fact, as alluded to by previous speakers, the fact that there is an international presence, which is the eyes and ears of the international community, we can get objective reports of what is actually happening on the ground, and the presence of 10,000 international peacekeepers restricts the freedom of the Israeli forces to do whatever it wishes in South Lebanon.
But what should the international community, Ray? What should the international community and the United Nations, the Security Council, be doing right now today to ensure that there is a continued presence of UN peacekeepers on the ground in southern Lebanon?
Well, the peacekeepers are in a very precarious situation in terms of their forced protection of their personal safety. So it's imperative that the Security Council act cohesively and together to support what is their peacekeeping force on the ground, and that the United States and the other permanent members and the non-permanent members and their allies put pressure on Israel to comply with Resolution 1701 and international law, and to respect the role of the UN peacekeepers, and to defend their right to be there and ensure that they are not subject to deliberate attack.
All right, Ali, your thoughts? How do you see the situation evolving? Could Israeli attacks force this UN peacekeeping mission to leave southern Lebanon? And what do you think the UN and the international community as a whole should be doing to amplify their mandate and ensure that they're more effective on the ground?
I don't think that these latest developments are going to force UNIFIL to withdraw from the area of operations. If any indication, what we've seen from UNIFIL up until now is more insistence on staying there in order to fulfill the mandate. So no, I don't. It's true that UNIFIL is not implementing its mandate to the full. And by the way, both sides, when I say both sides, I mean Hezbollah and Israel, they accuse UNIFIL of not doing enough when it comes to completely implementing Resolution 1701, but I think that UNIFIL's presence nevertheless is beneficial, as was mentioned now just by the previous guest. It is a neutral party which can record the violations, show which side is more committed and which side is less committed to this resolution. But I think that any dramatic changes are going to be extremely difficult. Hezbollah, the Lebanese government, more importantly, I don't think they're going to accept a Chapter 7 and the troops being there in accordance with Chapter 7. So I think for the time being, we're not going to see any real changes in UNIFIL's mandate.
Okay, Rami Kouri, you have the last word. What's the future for the UN mission in southern Lebanon? How can it be more effective?
The future for the UN and UNIFIL and all UN agencies in the region is the same as other cases. It's to gather an international consensus on the importance of implementing international law or international conventions and treaties and things effectively but equitably across the board to protect Israel from being attacked, to protect Lebanon from being attacked. This is what has to be done, but they've tried to do this, and it's very difficult when you have a power like Israel, which is extremely strong, has massive Western support, and doesn't give a hoot for international law or UN resolutions. So it's not an easy task, but it's become much more imperative, and I don't think anybody has the answer other than a multinational political campaign to end the Arab-Israeli conflict through negotiations that satisfy the rights and demands of both sides, which I believe can be done for all sides, because you've got Palestinians, Lebanese, Syrians, Israelis. It can be done, but nobody has tried to do it in the same way that, for instance, pressure was brought on South Africa. And Israel is moving in the direction of apartheid South Africa. The one option, by the way, would be to suspend Israel from the UN. But that's not going to happen.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for a fascinating discussion. Thank you for your insights. Ray Murphy, Ali Risk, Rami Kouri, thank you for joining us. And thank you too for watching. You can always watch this program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Fudi Batibo, and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching. Bye for now.
Okay, direct from Doha, Qatar mga sukina, ang Al Jazeera.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.
Okay. Sige po. Ayan po mga kababayan, no? Okay, para last na ata ito. Kasi overtime na tayo sa special report na itong programa natin sa umagang ito. Okay, 25 days. Election na po sa Amerika na. 25 days more to go, less than a month. Okay, election November 6 in America, no? Okay, President Barack Obama has called, Obama delivered a stunning call to action for grassroots support everywhere to rise up and take back our House majority, no? So, what is the solution here? Okay? President Obama is absolutely right. If we want to any hope of retaking our democratic House majority, no one can sit on the sideline, no? So, anong gagawin nito? Kailangan mag-pouring ng mag-pouring po ng donation mga suki, no? Okay, campaign donation. Okay, American citizen, okay, who are Democrats should help the call of former President Barack Obama, call for action. What call for action is a donation. Okay, so 25 days more to go. The election in America is upcoming, no? November 6. So, kailangan po mag-donate. Okay? So, we are joining President Obama and calling on our most loyal Democrats to rush in. Just donate for $4, no? $4 lang to the DCC, to hand Trump House Republican and stunning rebuke before it's too late. So, go ahead. Okay, kailangan talaga donate na po ang mga for the last 25 days, no? Okay, para makuha uli po ang majority ng Democrats in the House of Representatives in the Capitol Hill of Washington DC, mga suki, no? So yan po ang kailangan, donation. Ang problema ko, hindi ako makadonate, no? Kaya hinahanapan ako ng passport po. Hinahanapan ako ng green card. Hindi po yung katulad na panahon ni President Barack Obama, wala nang requirement. Basta mag-donate ka lang. Ngayon, hindi na ako makadonate. Okay, because of passport and a green card. I have no green card. Okay, I'm still a minority. Okay, Filipino from the South, mga kababayan, no? From the Southern Philippines. Wala pa naman akong hindi pa naman ko US citizen, mga suki, no? Hindi pa naman. Okay, pure pa. Okay, minority tribe from the Southern Philippines, no? So, hindi tayo makadonate. Kasi pag mag-donate ka, okay, nakapula, hinahanapan ka ng US passport, mga kababayan, no? So, sorry, former President Barack Obama, I can't donate anymore to the Democrats, no? Okay. I cannot. Very sorry. Ayan po, mga suki, ang problema. So, sinabi ko na kanina ang hangganan ng buhay ko habang kaya sa microphone. Okay, dito po naka-engage. Okay, sa mga peace work ng international community, mga kababayan, no? Ayan, nasa peace pa rin tayo hanggang ngayon, no? So, yan po ang problema natin sa DCC. Tatong C, no? DCCC. Ayan. Wala. So, palagay ko, tama na po yung special report natin. Saka bukas tayo magbalitang hangin, no? Okay, over na. 7 minuto na po, pasado po, sa 1 oras programa natin sa araw nito. Okay, ang dito sa local, sa Zamboanga, ang mainit na debate po, mga kababayan, tungkol sa 1,500, okay, akap tulong po sa mga kapwa natin po, Zamboangueño, Chabacano, mga kababayan. Basta Chabacano, Zamboangueño, lahat na. Pati ako, ay kasi dito ako nakatira, dito ako butante, Chabacano na. Zamboangueño na ako, mga suki, mga kababayan. Kahit galing ako sa ibang lugar. Okay, Chabacano minority. Dapat ang tawag sa akin, no? Zamboangueño minority. Dito akong residente ng Zamboanga. Dito ako buboto sa inyo. Anong tawag niyo sa akin? Ayan po, mga suki, no? Anong tawag niyo sa akin? Okay, Moro Chabacano? Okay. Bahala na kung anong tawag niyo. Basta dito ako boboto po sa midterm election at saka presidential election, no? Okay, sa midterm election sa Mayo. At saka presidential election sa 2028. So, wala kayong magawa. Dito tayo ay nanirahan. Okay, dito sa Zamboanga, no? Ayan. So, yan po ang katapusan ng balita natin, no? Okay, 8 minuto na pasado sa 1 oras. Ang overtime natin, mga kababayan. Ito na ata. Palakpakan natin ang balita, no? So, again and again, okay, United Nations General Assembly and United Nations Security Council how to stop the war in the Middle East, mga kababayan, no? If we want still peace. Okay, peaceful world. If you want still a peaceful world, what are you going to do? Okay, in the United Nations Organization, mga kababayan, no? Okay, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, no? I'm appealing. How do we solve conflict in Middle East? UN Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez. Tama bang English ko yon? Tama ba yon? Tama, no? Okay. Katagal na natin mag-English. Okay. Pero sanay ako sa Pilipino, no? Kasi tao ko ng lansangan, okay, sa mga marcha-marcha, noong mga panahon ko, bata-bata pa tayo, no? Yung street parliament, mga sugi ang tinatawag doon, no? Okay. Yun lang ang role natin. Talagang aktivista ng mga panahon yun, mga suki, no? Ngayon hindi na. Okay. Ang buhay ang cycle ng buhay ay pabago-bago. Noong kabataan ka, okay, hardcore ka sa mga panindigan, mga suki, no? Pag magkapamilya ka na, mabawas-bawasan na. Pagtanda mo, ganito na po, mga suki, no? Okay. So, yan. Tao tayo ng lansangan, no? Okay, noong mga panahon. Okay. Yung may iba yan, bago pa. Dekada 70s, 80s, mga kababayan. Tao tayo ng lansangan, no? Okay. Kaya, nahulma tayo, na-mold tayo na matibay manindigan, mga suki, no? Okay. May prinsipyo. Ayan. So, sige po, mga kababayan, no? Ito. Ang sarap ng tawa, no? Mas masarap ang tawa ko kaysa tawa ng Brigada Duro. Ayan, mga suki, no? Kasalukuyan. Okay, maabot ko lang digital, makaka-purchase lang ako ng mga ekwipo. Okay, makasabay na tayo, mga suki, no? Okay, makasabay na. Basta magkaroon ako ng ekwipo for digital, wala na po, makasabay na tayo. Okay, na-meet natin ang standard po ng digital news. Darating yon, darating, mga suki, no? Mag-ipon pa ako peseta-peseta. Okay, peseta lang. Peseta lang ang pangarap ko. Makaipon ng makaabot pambili ng gamit. O bakit nabili ko itong mga bago kung wala akong peseta-peseta, mga kababayan? Nakabili nga ako ng 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 unit. 6 po, mga suki, no? Puro latest lahat, mga suki. Kaya. Peseta-peseta lang. Ayan. Anong problema mo? Legit naman ang business mo. Legal, hindi illegal. Legal ang business mo. Bakit ka matakot mga pital? Mga pital ka. Okay, sa mapamagitan ng peseta-peseta, mga kababayan. Ayan. Hindi ka dapat matakot pag ang negosyo mo ay legal lahat. Kaya mag-secure tayo ng mga resibo eh. O, resibo. Ayan o. Resibo ito para makaisok ko ng resibo pag mangolekta. Ayan. Kino-comply natin lahat po ang paano magnegosyo po ng legal, mga kababayan, no? Hindi tayo busabos na negosyante, hindi. Sumusunod tayo sa legal na paraan, mga suki, na. At saka hindi ko gagawin yon. Ay pangangalaga natin po sa pagkatao natin, no? Ayan. So, ayan po, mga suki, hanapin po ng sound. And then ay paalam na tayo, no? So 25 days more to go. Kamala Harris is the leading presidential candidate in the US, no? Okay. Kulang lang naman ang makikinig sa akin, no? 84 million to 94 million po ang page engagement ko, mga kababayan, no? Kunti lang naman yun. Globally yun, no? Global, hindi local. Globally. Page engagement at saka yung reach. Ayan. Kunti lang naman. Kung magsalita ko rito, kunti lang naman no nakikinig. Ayan po, mga suki, no? Ayan. So, hanapin po natin ang sound and then paalam tayo sa umagang ito, mga kababayan, no? Sige. Katagal na ba itong programa ito ay nauna pa sa Facebook, mga suki, no? Ang programa ko ito nauna pa sa Facebook. Ayan. So nga pala, marapit ng anibersaryo ko. Okay, December 16, mga kababayan, no? Okay. Ang sigurado lang may cake at saka may tarpaulin, mga kababayan, no? Hindi ako maghingi ng mga donation. Okay, huwag, mga suki, no? Ayan. Hindi na yan. Okay, susorder po ng pondo po ng ADLSN TV News Online Corporation, no? Huwag tayo maghingi ng donation. Sige. Sige po, ito na po ang sound and then magpaalam tayo. Okay, mainit pa rin ang talakayan po sa BARM region. Okay, lalo po sa BARM, inside BARM government, mga suki, no? Okay, maraming pagdududa. Okay, dyan po sa loob ng BARM government kasalukuyan, no? Mga issue nagsilabasan. Okay, maraming pagdududa, mga kababayan. Sige, ito po. Okay, Datuteng, makukuha kaya ang governor po ng Maguindanao del Norte. Okay, siya po ang kasalukuyan na magplano po, kumuha po ng kapangyarihan po dyan sa del Norte, no? Okay, magaling yan magplano po si Datuteng. Talaga, na okay, yung first termer po ni Mariam Sangki, governor, kasama-sama kami. Hanggang second term ata yun, no? Bago ako nakauwi rito na po sa Zamboanga, kasama-sama natin mga grupo yan, no? Okay, yung mga organizer nila. Okay, yung si Bay Mariam Sangki, mga udadato ng gobernador po ng Maguindanao del Sur ngayon, no? Whole Maguindanao pa noon, eh. Okay, 36 municipality ang hinawakan niya noon, no? So, sama-sama tayo doon sa kampanya yon. Kung saan siya, doon tayo nung mga panahon yon, no? Magaling yan magplano si Datuteng. Talaga, magaling magplano, no? Okay, makukuha kaya niya, okay, sa midterm election, pero tumakbo siya ng governor po ng del Norte, no? Okay, tingnan natin kung makuha niya, no? Pero nahati po yung family alliance, no? Pero kahit mahati, kaya pa yan laruin po ni Datuteng, mga kababayan, no? Okay. May mga approach, mga estratehiya, pagkuha po ng boto po dyan po sa Maguindanao del Norte. Del Sur ay wala po, mga kababayan, no? Bay Mariam pa rin ang del Sur. Hindi pa makalat po yung mga okay, Sangki, Ampatuan clan, mga suki. Hindi yan magkahiwalay, mga suki, no? Okay, meron silang malakas na alliance. Sige. Ayan po, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Ayan. Malalaman natin yan pagpasok ng mga campaign period, malalaman natin kung sino po ay wagi. Diyan po sa Central Mindanao, kung saan tayo matagal po dyan maglingaw-lingaw po dyan sa Iren na yan, no? Okay, hanggang dito na muna. Okay, dito magmula po sa consolidated news natin, special report sa Middle East conflict mga kababayan, UN report, at saka mga Al Jazeera, at saka SBS mga kababayan na courtesy sa kanila. Bigla lang kasi pumasok, mag-pop up pag meron mga balita. Muhammad Jamjum ng Amman Jordan, thank you very much, no? At saka yung kasama niya, Angkor kanina. Ayan. So, sige po. May tatak na kasi itong ADLSN TV News online kahit saan sa daigdig, mga kababayan, no? May tatak na. Okay, may credibility na. Kasi hindi po maghingi ng pera ba? Okay, naaalala ko yung kaso ng Rappler. Okay, ng Ojimar na dati mga suki, no? Okay, muntik na kulong nga si itong si Rappler Maria Ressa mga kababayan. Itong Maria Ressa, hindi po maghingi ng pera itong programa natin, no? Makasurvive lang ng sarili niya. Ayan. Iniwasan ko po maghingi ng pera. Kasi pag maghingi ka ng pera, okay, wala na. Sira ka. Sira ang programa mo mga kababayan, no? Sige. Okay, mga suki mga kababayan, ayon. Paalam tayo sa programa po Halo-Halo Special, Opinion, Balita at Iba pa, Special Report. Okay, kasama po sa Serbisyo Publiko Tinig ng Mamamayan. And then ugnayan sa mamamayan. And then pag-aruga natin concern sa buong daigdig tungkol sa kapayapaan. Yung boses po ng daigdig malalaman natin po sa pamagitan ng mga news mga kababayan, na. So yon lang pangarap natin. Habang mawalan tayo ng hininga ng buhay, tuloy-tuloy lang po ang programa. Habang meron pa tayo hininga, no? Tuloy-tuloy lang ang programa natin dito sa ADLSN TV News Online. Ika-13th anniversary na po sa Oktubre 16, 2024 mga suki, no? Sigurado ang cake lang. Okay. Cake lang mga kababayan, na. Sige po. Ayan. Na. Okay, mga suki, mga kababayan, yan po ang balita natin. Okay, ang ano ba, babag sa ayuda ba rito sa Zamboanga? Sa Pagadian City, babag sa Kalambuan. Babag. Bisaya kasi ang babag, no? Hadlang. Babag sa Kalambuan.